you can never go back in time and like lose fat faster. You can never be like, oh man, like looking back at 8 weeks, I should have really pushed when we were contemplating whether or not I was going to be ready in time. You can never do that. All you can do is decide from the beginning that like, hey, I'm going to plan to be even possibly leaner than I need to be, because that's going to ensure that I'm not behind. That's going to ensure that I don't put myself in a position where I've got 2 weeks and an impossible amount of body fat to lose. So when we break this down, I mean, like this starts with going into prep with a plan. And I can guarantee you that if you follow these steps, you will not be blindsided by a stall. You won't end up, 3-4 weeks out, like, 10 pounds. Like that's a lot of weight. Like this is going to really take some digging in order to get to where I need to be. Now, the process that I would take and that I take with all of my clients, whether they're in contest prep or not, if they're in a fat loss phase and they have a target weight that we're aiming for, what I like to do is find the difference in pounds that you need to wash off in order to be truly stage lean. And like I said, if you don't know what stage lean is, and historically, if you've not been able to meet that mark, if you've been shy of it and you've been like, I wasn't close, like it may have been like 5-ish pounds. Okay, overshoot. If you don't have that hard number estimate, and I would go 3 to 5 pounds under, even conservatively. Now, losing 1 to 1.5 pounds a week, if the number of weeks you need to get stage lean, including a diet break, including being ready, let's say like 1 to 2 weeks out, because frankly, like the amount of clients that I've still like set, like the time, the date, I guess, that we're aiming for them to be stage ready, I set it at 2 weeks out. But the amount of times that's just not panned out, that they've gotten to that 2 week out mark and we're like still 1 pound shy of where they need to be, it happens more often than not. Very few people get ready early. Even if you're doing things perfectly, even if you're like systematically like looking at the rate of change and you're on track, things happen. And the number of weeks you need, if that number, including the diet break, including, being ready with a little bit of buffer, if that's more than 25, honestly, I think you're kind of setting yourself up for less than ideal prep. I think you're putting yourself in a position where if it's going to take you 25, 26, 30 weeks of true, like essentially dieting, not like once you're stage ready, then doing multiple shows after. If that number is more than 25, it's going to put you in a position where likely fatigue is going to be so high towards the end that you're more than likely going to run into issues with adherence. Now, what we just did, like this is how you build out your timeline. If you need to consistently lose 1 pound a week, this is a 500 calorie deficit. This is feasible for most people. Like, I mean, yes, like individuals who are a little more petite, this might mean that like you do have to get into that like 900,000 calorie range, maybe towards the end, but this is feasible. Now, the issue that I see that I think a lot of people, at least from what I hear from like other coaches and coaching like protocols, is that people will start prep and they will immediately put themselves into these excessive deficits. And if you're familiar with my content, then like I am a fan of starting that first month, starting it really strong and taking advantage of being at a higher body fat percentage, because thereby fat loss is going to be easiest. However, when we're talking about sustaining that deficit, if you need to sustain a 2 pound drop a week, I mean, like for 16 weeks, that's going to be really tight. And realistically, I think that's going to be too much to ask for a lot of people, metabolically, but then also just psychologically from an adherence standpoint, because we're talking about an 1,000 calorie deficit a day for, 16 weeks, 4 months. Okay, we're talking like you got 25 weeks of that, assuming you don't have a single week that you're going to fall short. I mean, like that, more than likely, it will be problematic. I don't ever go into prep expecting perfect conditions. I would love for that to happen, and I would love to be able to do that, myself, but it's never happened. Even like being in a very, a supportive environment, even being in an environment where I didn't have a lot of travel obligations, where I didn't get sick, things just happen. Hardly ever is someone's true rate of change consistent to, to the pound that you can guarantee over the course of 3 to 4 months, you're going to be able to predict that same rate of change and consistently produce that. Now, what's frustrating is that it's very easy to avoid getting into these positions where conditions are like you're banking on conditions being perfect. Going in and only giving yourself just the amount of time, I mean, like, you're honestly setting yourself up to need to take extremes towards the tail end, which ultimately that is the worst time to really begin to dig. If you're going to dig, if you're going to be hyper aggressive for a short sprint of a prep, honestly, I think the best time to do that is at the beginning when body fat is high. Fatigue is going to be the lowest at the beginning of prep. Dietary fatigue, meaning adherence, is going to be the highest at the beginning of prep. Like, what we're talking about, it's basic math. Like, you're taking that starting number, finding the difference between where you need to be at the end, dividing that over however many weeks you have, and also respecting that, like, that rate of change, it really shouldn't go above like 1.5% per week. So yeah, if you're a denser athlete, if you're a heavier athlete, if you're taller, maybe a 1.5% rate of change is unreasonable just given your total body weight. If you're 160 pounds to start with, 1.6 pounds, like that might be the most that you can really get away with before adherence begins to get a little spotty. Now, we're talking about very simple math. And this is something that, like, I do think that, yes, it largely falls on the coach to design this kind of plan to begin with. But, like, the fact of the matter is a lot of coaches aren't doing this. And this episode isn't like a shot at other coaches. It's more of an awareness, I guess a campaign towards an awareness that, like, hey, if you want to bring your athletes in better, or if you, the athlete listening, if you want to ensure that you're not stressed unnecessarily at the tail end of prep because you don't think you're going to be ready, then this is a conversation you need to have with your coach at the very beginning. And it's not to say like they need to fucking follow my timeline or follow these exact parameters, but at least getting familiar with, like, okay, what do they expect in terms of a rate of loss per week? What is good? What is not good? What is the lowest rate of change that is acceptable before we're going to make an adjustment to the deficit? So I know for me, like in 2022, I started prep, and that first week, I set my calories. My average was 1520. My cardio is 30 minutes a week, 7 days a week. So 210 minutes for the weekly total. Now with that was something I was like, I don't know what kind of rate of change I can base it off of, like a formula, but at the same time, in actuality, it wasn't enough. Like I was short of 0.8%. And granted, that week, it was the week of my period. So, I mean, there was like fluctuations in scale weight that I was then able to see, like, oh, this is going to happen every month, every 4 to 5 weeks. I'm going to see something that resembles more of like an artificial inflated weight, even though it's still going down. It's not going to go down as seamlessly as it is those other 3 to 4 weeks of the month. Because of that, because I wasn't certain if it was an artificial inflation, I took that as, okay, well, this is week 1. Now I'm behind. I'm already falling behind. So my options are to write it out 1 more week, or I can adjust calories. I can move them a little bit lower and put myself in a position to where ultimately, if I'm wrong, if this is an artificial inflation, well, then next week my drop should be that much higher. That was the decision making for me. When I started that prep in 22, and granted, like, yes, I had John as my second eye, but I mean, like, he'll tell you, like, the first 2 months, like, I mean, literally, I was really just coasting. I was like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. I've got it. It's not like we were checking in once a week. I was just like, this is what I'm doing. Like, I'll touch base with you once I get to the point where things get a little rocky. This decision making for the athlete, I know that it can be incredibly hard, and it can be hard if you have a coach in a more traditional sense where you're checking in with them every week, but it is on you. It's on the coach, yes, but like I do want to encourage like the athlete. I want you to advocate for yourself. If it feels like the rate of loss is slower, and you can have the foresight to at least look ahead and be like, if I don't make a change right now, well, this is now debt I'm going to have to pay off later. At some point during prep, maybe I'll have a week where I drop more than we're anticipating, but more than likely, if the target rate of change is already on the higher side, that's less probable for that to happen. Advocate for yourself. Have that conversation with the coach and let them know, like, hey, I'm in a position where I can push a little bit more. I'm not saying that like I don't trust your strategy, but I want to make sure that according to this plan, that I'm not in a position where 8 weeks from now I'm 3, 4, 5 pounds behind where I need to be respective to the show date.